In the grand kingdom of Kalendu, the skies always seemed to wear a veil of seriousness. Even the birds chirped cautiously, never daring to outshine the grandeur of the palace drums. Laughter was a rare commodity, more precious than gold and far more dangerous. For in Kalendu, there was a law etched not just on paper, but on skin and memory: no one beneath the royal bloodline shall dare to smile at the crown. This law was said to have been born from a long-forgotten betrayal, when a jester's grin led a former king to his doom. Since then, smiles had been chained, especially in the presence of royalty. Smiling at the monarch was akin to spitting in his face. Smiling at the prince was like drawing a sword against him. And yet, this was not a truth Ira had fully grasped. Or maybe she had, but her heart simply refused to carry such a rule. Ira was born in the servant quarters of Kalendu's palace. Her cradle the warmth of wood fires and the lullaby of scrubbing brushes. Her mother, Lenda, was a kitchen worker, respected among the other servants for her quiet precision and quick hands. Her daughter, however, was a song the palace didn't know how to quiet. Ira laughed when the rain fell, she hummed when the soup boiled, and she smiled, always smiled. Her smile was not defiant, nor flirtatious, nor mocking. It was honest, bright, white, innocent. That morning the drums had summoned everyone. Prince Omari, the crown jewel of Kalendu, was to return from a victory in the eastern provinces. There would be a procession. Trumpets. A river of petals. The servants were told to stand at attention along the corridor of the eastern wing, eyes down, back straight, faces blank. Any deviation would be noticed. Any expression could be fatal. Ira stood among them, her fingers pressed tight to the folds of her dress. She had never seen Prince Omari up close before. Rumors spoke of his golden armor and cold eyes, how he had never smiled since birth. They said the only time he showed emotion was in battle, his sword grinning red. Ira told herself not to look. She told herself to become air. To become stone. But curiosity is louder than caution in the hearts of the young. The prince appeared, flanked by guards. His skin gleamed under the weight of gold, his jaw was set like carved ivory, and his steps rang like thunder on the palace stones. As he passed, Ira lifted her eyes, just a fraction, just a moment. And their eyes met. It was not long, not enough for a gasp, not enough for a word. But her lips curved, gentle and uncontrollable. A smile. Honest, open, pure. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Someone gasped. A hand clutched a chest. The prince's steps faltered, ever so slightly. And then he moved on without a word, without a gesture. But everyone had seen. Everyone. Ira bowed her head so quickly it nearly snapped her neck. Her heart pounded like festival drums. She tried to melt into the floor. For a moment nothing happened. She finished her duties in the kitchen with trembling hands. The older servants did not speak to her. Her mother didn't even look in her direction. Then came the night. The footsteps came like a warning, soft then firm. 2 palace guards appeared in the kitchen doorway. One of them simply pointed. Ira didn't speak. She followed them. They dragged her behind the stables, where the shadows swallowed screams, and the horses were taught to stay silent. The beating was not loud, but it was thorough. Wood against flesh. Hands against softness. The pain was a language she didn't understand until it sang through her bones. Her mother was waiting when they dumped her outside the servants' quarters. Lenda didn't speak immediately. She just helped her daughter inside, cleaned the wounds with herbs and silence, then finally said the words Ira would never forget. Your joy must be hidden in shadows. It is not welcome in the sun. Ira didn't answer. Her lip was split, her cheek swollen. But even through the ache she couldn't understand. Why, she whispered finally. Why is a smile dangerous? Lenda's face darkened like a storm preparing itself. Because your smile has no weight, she said. But to them it is a threat. It means you forgot your place. And they punish reminders. For days Ira did not smile. Not while sweeping the halls. Not while washing the prince's armor. Not even when a tiny bird landed on her shoulder one morning and chirped a melody that matched her childhood lullabies. But the smile lived inside her still. Curled up. Hiding. Waiting. Prince Omari, on the other hand, found himself strangely restless. Night after night, his sleep was interrupted by something new, dreams. Vivid, persistent, unsettling. In them he saw a girl. Her face never clear but always smiling. Sometimes she stood in a burning garden, other times at the edge of a war-torn cliff. Once, he dreamed of her standing above his childhood crib, smiling while the wind carried away the crown meant for his head. He woke with sweat on his chest and confusion in his throat. He had never dreamed before. Not once in his life. His tutors said dreams were for the weak. But now they came nightly, and always with that smile. That curve of lips. That mystery. He summoned his personal scribe. "Find out who was punished 3 days ago in the servant quarters," he ordered without meeting the scribe's eyes. The scribe bowed and left. When the name returned, Ira, daughter of Lenda, Omari did not react. He simply stared at the garden outside his window. A place he had not visited in years. That night, Ira was told to bring a tray of spiced tea to the prince's chambers. She almost refused. Her mother gripped her wrist before she could speak. "Go," she said. "But leave your smile at the door." Ira walked the hall like a ghost. Her bruises had faded, but her fear was fresh. When the guards let her in, she didn't lift her eyes. She placed the tray on the carved table, bowed low, and turned to leave. "Wait," came the voice. It wasn't harsh. It was curious. She froze. "You were beaten," the prince said. "Because of a smile." Ira said nothing. "Do you know why it mattered?" Still she stayed silent. He rose from his chair, footsteps light but sharp. "Because I haven't stopped seeing it," he said. "That smile. It follows me. Even in my sleep." Ira dared to glance up just a little. His eyes were not cruel. They were confused. A man raised by war, speaking to something he didn't know how to name. "Why did you smile?" he asked her. "Did you not fear me?" Ira finally spoke. "No," she said. "You look tired." "I smiled because I hoped it would help." Omari blinked. Something cracked in his chest. A hairline fracture in years of cold. He turned away, dismissing her with a nod. Ira left the room, her heart pounding again. But this time it wasn't pain she carried. It was a seed. A smile. Buried. But growing. Prince Omari could not find peace that night. He lay in his silk-draped bed, surrounded by golden pillars and carvings of his ancestors, but the air felt tight, too still. The sounds of night, crickets, rustling trees, distant laughter, all blurred into one hollow hum. He closed his eyes, but the image that greeted him wasn't the palace or his court. It was a forest, quiet and strange, and in the middle of that silence stood a girl. She wasn't regal or draped in jewels. She wore simple cloth and stood barefoot on damp soil. Her hair was wild, yet beautiful, and her eyes held something ancient. But what unsettled Omari was her smile, soft, sad, glowing as if the moon had shaped it. The smile wasn't of joy nor mockery. It was a smile that held centuries, as if it was carved from memories that weren't hers. He tried to speak to her in the dream, but the wind took his words away. His feet were rooted to the ground. The girl simply smiled, and then the forest turned dark red, like twilight had spilled across the trees. He woke up gasping. His chamber was undisturbed, the guards outside unaware of his sudden breathlessness. He sat up, clutching his chest. His hands trembled and his fingers ached. Every joint felt strained as if he'd clenched something all night. When he lit a candle, he noticed his nails were dusty and his fingertips red. He rubbed them together. They felt bruised like they had been digging or carving. He shook his head. "A dream," he muttered. "Just a dream." But when he looked at the empty wooden table beside his bed, he swore there were faint scratch marks. The palace physician, had he been called, would have blamed stress. The crown prince was preparing to lead the autumn ceremony soon, and pressure could twist the mind. Omari told himself the same thing, but the ache in his hands lingered. The next night he avoided sleep. He read old scrolls, watched the guards change shifts, even drank bitter tea meant to keep the mind alert. But his eyelids grew heavy before the 5th bell, and the moment he closed his eyes he returned, not to the forest but to a different place. This time it was a valley of mirrors. Broken, floating shards surrounded him, each reflecting parts of a smile. Not the full face but pieces, the curve of a lip, the glint in an eye, a dimple half-shadowed. And in the center of the valley stood a large stone, and someone was carving on it. He approached, heart racing. It was himself, chiseling that same smile into the rock with trembling hands. He dropped the chisel in the dream, horrified. Blood poured from his palms where the tools had cut him. But the girl's face on the stone was complete. She was looking at him again. The smile was unchanged, beautiful, haunting, eternal. He woke up crying. Silent tears ran down his cheeks before he even understood why. He wiped them quickly, ashamed. A prince should not weep over dreams. But that morning, his servants found small wooden chips on his bed and floor. No one could explain how they got there. In the days that followed, Omari became distant. He still attended court, dressed impeccably, spoke with honor, but his eyes were always scanning the crowd. At night, he would sketch furiously, trying to remember the exact curvature of that smile. Paper after paper was filled with lips, eyes, cheeks. None were right. None were hers. On the 7th night, the dream returned to the forest. The girl was sitting this time on a fallen log, her hands wrapped around her knees. She was crying but still smiling. He moved closer. This time his feet were not rooted. The trees whispered, "She is not yours." But Omari ignored them. He reached out his hand, and as he touched her shoulder, she vanished like dust in the wind. But the smile remained, floating like a breath in the air. He jolted awake with a scream that startled the guards. He dismissed them quickly, claiming a nightmare. That day he walked the palace halls with red-rimmed eyes. When the court artist showed him sketches for the autumn ceremony, he paused. One of the designs had a face, faint in the background, almost a mistake. But the smile, it was close. Too close. He demanded the artist come forth. "Who drew this?" Omari asked. The artist bowed. "A young apprentice, my prince. A girl from the lower quarters. She helps grind pigments and sweep the floors. She must have doodled without meaning to." Omari demanded her name. "Ira, I believe," the artist replied. "She's quiet. Keeps to herself." The name meant nothing to him. But the face in his mind burned like fire. That night he dreamed again, but this time there was no forest or valley. Just darkness. And in it a whisper, "You looked at Joy and they punished her." He awoke shaking. That morning he told his guards to find the girl named Ira. Quietly. Without alerting the court. He said it was for inspection, some vague story about her breaking protocol. But it wasn't punishment he sought. The captain of the guard returned with troubling news. "She is not in her quarters. The other servants say she's been reassigned. Someone moved her to the outer kitchens. No one knows why." Omari's heart clenched. The outer kitchens were almost outside the palace, a place for refuse, labor, and punishment. He knew without being told. Someone had seen the moment she smiled. Someone had decided she had to be broken. And yet, she had smiled. Not flirted. Not mocked. Just smiled. That night, when he lay in bed, he didn't fall asleep right away. He whispered into the dark. "If you can hear me, come again. Let me see your smile." But sleep betrayed him in silence. No dreams came. No forest. No carving stone. No girl. The ache in his fingers returned, worse than ever, and he spent hours pacing, then sitting, then pacing again. By dawn he had made a decision. He could no longer pretend. Something, perhaps fate, perhaps memory, was trying to speak to him through that girl's face. He needed to find her. Not because she broke a law, but because she had broken something older, the silence around his heart. And yet, the more he searched, the more she slipped into shadows. Orders were covered by other orders. Her reassignment had no paper trail. Her name began disappearing from scrolls. Even the artist who once saw her couldn't remember the shape of her face. Except Omari. In his dreams he began carving again. But now it was not wood or stone. It was air. He chiseled with light and smoke, building her smile out of breath and memory. One day he whispered her name in the garden breeze and the wind carried it back, Ira. It was then he knew, her smile had not vanished. It had simply found its way into his dreams, and refused to leave. Ira moved quietly through the palace garden, her bare feet brushing against the dew-touched grass. The morning sun painted streaks of gold across the hedges, and birds flitted through the canopies of bougainvillea and frangipani. Her job was to clean, to sweep the paths, gather fallen petals, and make sure no leaf dared disrespect the symmetry of the royal plants. She did it without complaint, with the same quiet diligence she gave to every task. But today something stirred in her chest, something old and soft and aching to be heard. She hummed it low under her breath. A tune her grandmother once sang while braiding her hair. A lullaby of rivers and wide skies, of spirits who lived in the trees. She thought the garden would swallow her voice. But it didn't. Unseen by Ira, Prince Omari stood on a balcony above, hidden behind a curtain of vines. He had come to breathe after another restless night, after the dream had once again wrapped around him like a storm. The girl in the dark forest, her face aglow, her sorrow bright. But today in the stillness of the garden, he heard something. A hum, sweet and low, curling through the leaves like incense smoke. It caught in his ears and in his memory. He didn't know it yet, but the voice below belonged to the smile that haunted his dreams. He stepped away unsettled. Later that day he summoned the gardener and ordered that the flower beds near the east hedge, the place where the humming had come from, be replanted with white jasmine and wild marula. This spot, he said, should always bloom. Ira knew nothing of this. But when she was called aside by the head maid that evening, her back stiffened. The woman's eyes were sharp and sunken, always watching. "You bring attention you were never meant to carry," the maid hissed. "Keep your voice locked, your face down. This palace does not forgive what it cannot explain." Ira swallowed hard and bowed. She returned to the garden, this time silent, though the song still buzzed at the edge of her lips. But Prince Omari was not free. That night the dreams twisted further. He stood in a moonlit grove. The trees bore faces. All of them hers. Each trunk held a mouth carved with gentle curves, eyes half-lidded with sadness. Her smile followed him. When he drank from a stream in the dream, the reflection of her mouth shimmered back at him. When he awoke, his cup of water tasted like memory. He began to question himself. Who was this girl? Was she real? Why did her smile bloom in impossible places? The palace was a place of control, of protocol. Smiles were measured. Joy was a luxury afforded only to those high enough not to be punished for it. And yet, something about that smile, the one he saw in the garden and again in his dreams, felt like rebellion wrapped in peace. The head priest warned the prince, "Dreams that come nightly are not dreams. They are messages." Omari did not share what he saw. But from that day he began walking through the gardens more often. Quietly. With eyes peeled for the girl with the voice like sunlight through leaves. Ira noticed him once in the corner of her eye. She ducked her head, pretending to be deep in pruning. Her heart beat faster, but she dared not look up. She had already paid for one smile. Still, when he passed, she felt the air stir. And the song came back to her lips. That night the dream returned, but now the grove was real. Now the face carved into trees was wet with tears. And the prince woke with a whisper in his ear, "You saw me." And in some way he had. Omari could no longer rest. The prince who once rode through valleys with a head high and shoulders broad now sat hunched beside the fire, hands trembling with a chisel and a block of wood. Every night, the same image pulled at his bones, a smile luminous in the dark, defying sorrow with something deeper than happiness. He had to release it. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she was real. But the smile would not let him go. He carved in secret at first. In the shadows of his private chamber, far from royal eyes, he shaped the curve of a cheek, the softness of lips, the quiet command of sorrow woven with joy. But he never finished a single figure. Something always felt missing. One statue was too stiff, another too gentle, the next almost right, until the eyes refused to speak the truth he saw in the dream. The floor of his chamber was littered with curls of wood and splinters of discarded attempts. His bed sat cold and untouched, replaced by a small bench where he hunched for hours, covered in fine dust. Even his guards began whispering. The queen mother noticed the change first. The prince now skipped court meetings, meals, and even rituals of state. His once precise words were slurred with distraction. He didn't see people when they addressed him. He looked through them into a space only he could see. Servants who entered his room often found shavings stuck to their feet, and faint outlines of a girl's face scratched onto mirrors and doors. Word reached the elders and they called a private council. "He is cursed," one of them said, his voice low and urgent. "The royal line has long forbidden indulgence in dreams. This joy is not of this world." They sent for a dream reader, a woman older than the walls of the palace, her eyes veiled in white cloth, her fingers stained with ink and oil. She came quietly at dusk when the palace was least awake. Omari did not resist her presence. He sat still as she touched his temples with slow, precise movements, then dipped her thumb in ash and pressed it to his forehead. "He dreams of a forbidden joy," she said finally. "A happiness he was never taught to carry. It lives in a girl who smiled when she was not allowed to. It burns him not with fire but with memory." They did not understand. "What does this mean?" the queen demanded. "Is it love?" "No," the dream reader said. "It is older than that. It is something his blood was trained to reject, freedom that sings beneath sorrow." Outside the palace, a strange thing began to happen. The forest that bordered Kalendu began to weep. The trees, old, tall, noble, began to drip sap even in the dry season. Not just a trickle but thick, steady lines that looked like tears. At first the villagers thought it was disease. But then the shapes appeared, on trunks and stumps, the faintest carvings of a girl's face. Her smile. The woodcutters refused to chop in the weeping groves. "The trees remember her," they whispered. she who smiled against silence. Others came at night to touch the bleeding bark, smearing their fingers with sap and whispering prayers. Mothers brought their sick children to the forest's edge and begged for dreams. Stories rose like mist, that the smile was a spirit now, and those who looked upon it would learn what had been stolen from them. In the palace, Omari's carvings continued. He no longer ate during the day. His hands bore deep calluses, and the flesh around his nails cracked from the hours of shaping and sanding. One night he did something he had not done before. He carved with his eyes closed. Letting the memory guide his hands, he allowed the wood to speak. When he opened his eyes, the figure in his lap bore the closest resemblance yet. Not perfect but close. The lips almost moved. He wept then. Not out of sadness, but because the carving had given him something real, proof that she existed, that his dreams had not lied. When the head priest learned of the carvings, he demanded they be burned. The prince risks madness, he said. He sculpts temptation into memory. But Omari refused. For the first time in weeks he raised his voice. If I burn her face, I burn the only truth I have left. The figure stayed. The bleeding forest continued. Anaira, deep in the garden shadows, felt her heart stir each time she passed a certain jasmine tree that had begun to drip sap from its bark, as if something inside it missed her smile too. The courtyard had always been Ira's refuge. A quiet place where no one noticed her unless there were leaves to be swept or paths to be cleared of fallen petals. But on this particular afternoon, as the sun burned gently through the thin clouds and a hush fell over the palace, Ira found something that silenced even her aching hands. A bird, small and trembling, its wing broken and eyes glassy from hunger. She knelt beside it, pushing her broom aside. Her hands, roughened by years of labor, moved with an odd tenderness. She cradled the bird in her palms, whispering soft sounds that weren't words but comfort. She dipped a cloth in the bucket beside her and dabbed its beak. Her lips curled, not in laughter, not in joy, but in something quieter, a smile of care, of mourning laced with hope. And someone saw it. The head maid. Tall and sharp-eyed, she stepped out from the corridor with a look that could freeze fire. Her eyes fell on the curve of Ira's mouth, on the gentle softness in her gaze. A servant girl smiling, not at royalty, not at grandeur, but at a broken bird? It was too much. You dare, the head maid said, her voice slicing through the warm air. Ira flinched but didn't let go of the bird. Smiling again. After all your warnings. After being marked. The maid's hand swept through the air and struck Ira across the cheek, but the girl held steady, shielding the bird with her body. That night, no one saw her at dinner, not even in the back corridors where servants shared scraps and whispers. She was dragged to the edge of the palace grounds, beyond the kitchens, beyond the garden, to a small windowless shed once used to store firewood. The door slammed shut. Chains clicked into place. No mattress, no light. Only a bowl of bitter water placed beside the threshold each morning and evening. And silence. Inside, Ira did not cry. Not at first. Her hands still curled around the memory of the bird's warmth. But each hour stole something. Her voice, which once hummed gently among the jasmine trees, withered into silence. Her body, which once moved like wind through leaves, bent with ache. The smile, once a flicker even in sorrow, faded from her face entirely. But her heart remembered. It kept the bird's tiny heartbeat alive within it. It kept the garden's scent, the soft echo of dreams, the carved wood and silent songs. It held on. Far across the palace, the prince stirred. In his sleep, he reached for the girl whose face had lit the forest in his dreams, but this time she was not there. The smile that once came to him through water, through tree trunks, through the very veins of the land, was gone. He called her in the dream, but no answer came. Instead, the forest stood cold and gray. The trees, once lush and dripping with golden sap, stood dry and brittle. Wind moved through the branches, but not a single leaf danced. Birds did not sing. Shadows moved, but they were hollow. The prince awoke with a scream lodged in his throat. His body felt heavy like stone, and his heart thudded against his ribs in panic. He ran to the carved figures in his chamber, grabbing one after another, searching their faces for the smile he had chased for weeks. But each one now looked different, not just incomplete but wrong. The lips were sealed. The eyes no longer glowed. His hands trembled, and before he realized what he was doing, he hurled one figure across the room. It shattered against the wall. Another followed. Then another. Servants outside dared not enter. By morning, the once sacred grove of trees had begun to crumble. What had once wept with memory now cracked with loss. The sap dried mid-drip, hardening like scars across the bark. Villagers who returned to the forest that day found the carvings faded, the smile erased. "The spirit is silent," an old woman said. "Something has happened to her." In the palace, the queen mother watched her son from behind her veil. He had not slept since the scream. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. He refused meals. Refused counsel. He sat for hours before his carvings, staring at hands that no longer knew how to shape joy. "You must banish these dreams," the high priest urged her. "They are devouring him. We must cleanse his room, his bed, his mind." But the queen only shook her head. "It is not the dream that torments him," she whispered. "It is the absence of it." 3 days passed. On the 4th, the shed door creaked open. The head maid stood outside with a face unreadable, but her tone was clear. Punishment had been served. Ira stumbled out. Her legs, unused to walking, trembled beneath her. Her lips were cracked, her hair matted with sweat and dust. But her eyes, they still held the memory. She looked around slowly, breathing in the air like someone returned from death. No one offered her water. No one asked where she had been. She was handed a broom and pointed toward the steps of the outer court. And Ira, without a word, began to sweep. But something had changed. Wherever her broom touched the ground, the wind stirred. Light, faint but present. The dust didn't rise in defiance. It scattered like it was dancing, like it remembered the rhythm she used to hum. The bird was gone. She searched with her eyes as she moved from one end of the courtyard to the other, but it was nowhere. Whether it had flown or died she did not know. But she whispered a song for it anyway, not from her lips but from the rhythm of her arms, the tilt of her body, the way she paused at each step. And far above her, behind a curtain in the prince's chamber, Omari watched. He didn't know why he had wandered to the window, why his eyes searched the courtyard like a starving man. But when he saw her, not smiling, not radiant but simply standing, something inside him cracked. It was her. He didn't know how. The smile was gone, yes, but her presence pulsed through the stones. She moved like a memory aching to be whole again. And his heart recognized her, even as his mind doubted. That night he carved again. Not her smile this time, but her silence. The shape of her shoulders, the weight of her breath, the way she held sorrow without drowning in it. And for the first time he did not destroy the figure. He placed it beside his bed. And in his dream, the forest remained gray. But one tree, just one, had a small shoot growing from its base. Green, soft, alive. He woke weeping. The palace walls had grown suffocating. Omari, once proud heir to the kingdom of Kalendu, now felt them closing in like the jaws of a beast. Day after day, his mind wandered from council chambers and sword drills to the same unbearable memory, not of war or duty but of a smile. A forbidden smile. A smile that shimmered in his dreams like starlight on water. No matter how hard he tried to bury it, it rose in his thoughts like breath in cold air. He had tried reason. He had tried meditation. He had tried bathing in chilled pools and speaking with sages. None of it worked. The smile returned each night, stronger and closer. Now she did not only smile, she wept. She called out without words, and the forest around her dimmed. And when he awoke, his heart thudded like a drum, as though calling him toward something he didn't yet understand. One dawn, before the palace stirred and the guards rotated shifts, Omari shed his royal silks for plain linen. He wrapped his face in a traveler's cloth, took a small pouch of coin, and slipped out the eastern gate like a shadow fleeing the sun. Only his most trusted guard knew, and that guard remained silent, bound not by duty but by compassion. The kingdom of Kalendu was vast, but Omari's feet led him to the outer villages, the humble places where the soil was rough, the markets were loud, and the people lived simple, honest lives. He wandered from one settlement to the next, asking strange questions to puzzled farmers and potters. Have you seen a girl with sorrow in her eyes but joy in her smile? Do you know of someone who hums when she thinks no one hears? Has anyone ever smiled at a prince and been punished for it? Most waved him off. Some offered tea. A few gave him suspicious glances. But none gave him the answer he sought. Days passed. His clothes grew dusty and his fingers calloused from the journey. He ate flatbread with children, washed in river streams, and stared at the stars wondering if the dreams were madness or memory. Then one afternoon, in a village nestled beside an old baobab tree, Omari came across an old woman sweeping her doorstep. Her hands were gnarled with years, but her eyes held fire, not anger but something fierce and deep. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You're not from here." "I'm just a traveler," he said. "No," she replied. "You're searching for something." He hesitated, then nodded. I saw a girl once. She smiled at me. She shouldn't have. And now I can't forget. The woman's sweeping slowed. Smiles, she said softly. They don't belong to kings or laws. They rise from the soul. He crouched beside her. I didn't punish her. But someone did. And now, her smile haunts my dreams. I fear it's gone. The woman leaned on her broom. A smile is a fragile thing, yes. But it remembers. Even when it's buried, it waits. Sometimes it's all someone has. Her words struck him deeper than he expected. Do you know her? He asked, desperation slipping into his voice. The old woman's eyes turned to the hills beyond the village. I knew a girl once who smiled at a bird with a broken wing. And they beat her for it. She didn't cry, but she stopped singing. I watched her learn to wear silence like a scarf around her throat. Omari felt his breath catch. Where is she? She's not lost, the woman replied. But neither is she yours to find. Let her smile come to you if it chooses. He lowered his eyes. I never meant to take anything from her. You already did, the woman said gently. But perhaps, you can give something back. Omari nodded. He pressed a silver coin into her palm and turned to leave, but she called after him. Sometimes, young prince, she said, for she had known all along, a smile is a kind of prayer. And when the world forbids it, the gods take notice. That night, Omari made camp beneath a sycamore tree. The wind rustled softly through the leaves, and the stars blinked high above like watchful eyes. He lay on the hard ground, sleepless, heart heavy. But then the dream came. It was not like the others. The forest was darker, the air thicker. He stood beneath the same tree, but she was no longer just smiling. She was reaching for him. Her fingers, slim and strong, extended through the space between them. Her eyes were sad but not broken. Her mouth moved silently, and though no sound emerged, he heard it in his chest. You saw me, she said. And he did. Not just in the dream, truly for the first time. He saw her pain, her fear, her quiet strength. He reached back. Their fingers brushed. He woke up with tears running down his face, but his chest lighter, as if some burden had shifted. The dream had changed. She was not trapped anymore. She was waiting. And now so was he. The throne room was colder than usual. Not in temperature but in spirit. The golden torches flickered, but their warmth refused to touch the prince's skin. Omari stood alone before the great wall of ancestral carvings, a sacred place where each generation of royalty left behind their triumphs and memories in polished wood. But today he did not look at the old kings or the victorious queens. His eyes were fixed on something newer, something strange, a carving that had not been there weeks ago. It was a face. Not of a warrior or elder but of a young girl. Simple. Unadorned. Yet her smile, it shimmered with something the others lacked. It was tender, fragile, almost alive. It was the same smile that had haunted his dreams, curved lips slightly parted, with sorrow tucked behind joy. As if the carving itself remembered both laughter and pain. He reached out and placed a hand on the wooden cheek. The surface felt warm as if it had been carved not by a tool but by fire. His fingers trembled. And then the lips moved. Not with sound at first but with breath. Faint like a sigh caught in wood. Then came a whisper, softer than wind through silk. Asterisk asterisk Ira, asterisk asterisk. Omari staggered back, heart pounding in his chest. The hall was empty, yet the air thrummed with presence. He turned to the guard stationed outside. Bring me every servant named Ira, he commanded, his voice tight. Now. The guards hesitated only for a breath, then vanished into the palace corridors. Within the hour, four young women stood before him, each trembling, each afraid. The royal court was summoned too, drawn by whispers of the prince's strange behavior. The queen, regal and alert, took her place beside the throne, watching her son with eyes sharpened like blades. Omari stepped down from the dais and walked before the servants, one by one. He looked into their faces. 3 looked confused, blinking rapidly, shifting under the weight of his gaze. And then he stopped at the 4th. She did not look up. Her hands were clasped tight, her chin tucked in. A faint bruise darkened the side of her jaw. She looked smaller than he remembered, though he had only seen her once and that for a moment. Yet there it was again, not the smile itself but the memory of it, glowing around her like candlelight. You, he said. What is your name? Ira, she whispered, her voice hoarse. My prince. The court murmured. A few nobles leaned in, others furrowed their brows. The queen's lips thinned. Omari moved closer. He knelt slightly, meeting her lowered gaze. Why did your smile enter my dreams? Ira flinched. The question was not one she could have imagined. She had expected accusations. Maybe death. Maybe exile. But this? Her voice dried in her throat. I don't know, she said, barely audible. But you smiled, he said. That day. When the jug broke. You looked at me. You smiled. Why? She hesitated. Because I thought you were kind. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to. His heart cracked at the honesty in her voice. He turned to the queen. She is the one. Her name was spoken by the carving. The queen rose swiftly. This is madness. No carving speaks. You disgrace your bloodline with superstition. I know what I heard, Omari replied. She's bewitched you, the queen snapped. You, a prince dreaming of a servant? Now speaking to wood as if it breathes? This girl has poisoned your mind. Ira's knees gave way. She fell to the floor, hands over her head. She could feel the room closing in. Nobles whispering, guards moving. Her mother had warned her this could happen. That joy was dangerous. That a poor girl's smile could be seen as a weapon. I did nothing, she said, sobbing now. I didn't cast spells. I don't even know how. The queen strode forward. Take her away. 2 guards approached. Omari raised his hand. Stop. They froze. I won't allow her to be harmed. She is not your equal, the queen hissed. This is a child of dust, not destiny. Let her go before you shame this kingdom. Omari looked at Ira again. She was still on the floor, shaking, but she did not beg. She did not plead for her life. Even in fear, her spine tried to stay straight. He whispered, I don't care what they think. I saw truth in you. I heard your name from a mouth that cannot lie. You were dreaming, the queen spat. Then let me dream, he replied. The court fell silent. At last the queen turned, fury masked in elegance. Very well. If the prince is bewitched, he cannot rule, not until he is cleansed. She walked out, her robes trailing like storm clouds. Ira was lifted roughly to her feet by the guards. But as she was dragged out of the hall, her eyes met Omari's once more. No smile. Not yet. But something else passed between them, something the court could not see. He stepped back toward the carving. It was still there. Still smiling. The torches were lit before the sun had even begun to set. Courtiers dressed in rich silks gathered in the palace courtyard, their faces tight with unease. At the center stood a towering heap of carved wooden panels, each one bearing the same mysterious smile. Omari's carvings. His obsession. His so-called visions. His madness, as some whispered. To others, they were dangerous relics that had bewitched the prince and stained the throne. The queen stood tall on the palace balcony, her hand raised, silencing the murmurs of the gathered court. Her voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. Tonight we purge the poison from our hearts. These cursed carvings have twisted our prince's mind, stolen our peace, and infected our people with false dreams. Below, palace guards stood with torches in hand. With a nod from the queen, they moved forward and thrust the flames into the pile. The wood caught quickly, too quickly, as though it had been waiting for fire. Crackling filled the air like laughter. The carvings hissed and popped as flames devoured them, their edges curling into blackened whispers. Faces once carved with delicate care, cheeks curved, lips parted, eyes knowing, were swallowed by the blaze. But as the fire grew, the mood of the crowd began to shift. It was the smoke. It did not rise like ordinary smoke. It spiraled. It twisted. It danced. One servant gasped. Another fell to his knees. Out of the haze, a face began to form, not in the flames but above them. A face made of smoke, suspended in the air like a ghost of charcoal and memory. A woman's face. Gentle. Calm. Smiling. And it was unmistakably hers. Ira. The queen's eyes widened in horror. Look away, she shrieked. It's a trick. A final curse. But few obeyed. Even the guards stared, frozen in place. The face in the smoke turned slowly as if blessing each watcher with a gaze. Her smile deepened, not mockery, not victory, but something warmer, sadder, forgiving. And then a wind came. Not from the east, nor from the sea, but from within the palace itself, as if the very halls exhaled. The wind carried the smoke upwards, spreading it over rooftops, gardens, and towers. The face dissolved but the smile remained, stretching like a soft wind across the land. By dawn, it had touched more than the palace. Farmers woke from sleep humming melodies they'd never learned. Children rose with their lips curled upward in peace. A merchant in the southern market claimed he had seen the girl in his dream, offering him bread he never remembered needing. A warrior far from home wept beside a stream, not from sorrow, but because he remembered a smile that felt like belonging. Omari, locked in his chamber under the queen's orders, stood at his window and watched the sky. The stars had vanished behind a thin veil of lingering smoke. He pressed his forehead to the glass and whispered her name. No one answered. But the air smelled faintly of carved wood and warmth. In the city square, a boy carved a face into a tree. Not out of skill but memory. No one taught him how. He simply said, "She smiled at me in my dream." Word spread too fast. Within days, dozens across the kingdom were whispering of the smile. They described it differently. Some said it was motherly, others romantic, others divine. But all agreed it had brought comfort. A rare, unspoken understanding. A grace. The queen raged. In an emergency council session, she stood before the elders and declared, "This is no smile. It is an infection, a seed of rebellion disguised as sweetness." She would overturn the order of things. She would bring chaos in silk wrappings. She issued a decree. No one was to speak of Ira again. Her name was banned from scrolls, lips, songs, and dreams. If anyone was caught carving, dreaming, or speaking of the smiling girl, they would be punished. Her story was to be erased. She was not a girl anymore. She was an illusion, a danger. But the order came too late. The smile had already taken root. In private rooms, mothers told their children stories they'd heard from their grandmothers, of a girl who smiled in the face of cruelty, of a servant who wore kindness like armor. In secret, potters began shaping clay into faces that bore no name, only a feeling. In drawings hidden under beds, Ira's smile lived on. Omari stopped speaking in council meetings. He did not resist his confinement. But he carved with whatever he could: chalk, soap, coal. His chamber walls slowly filled with eyes that remembered and lips that forgave. One night, when the wind returned, the queen stood alone at her window. The moon hung low and the smoke had long faded. But a reflection danced in the glass, a smile that did not belong to her. She turned away. But the reflection didn't. Ira ran under the cover of darkness, her bare feet barely touching the earth as if the wind itself carried her. The palace walls faded behind her, and with every step, the weight of stone and fear began to loosen from her shoulders. She didn't know how long she had been locked away, only that silence had become her only companion. But now the trees ahead beckoned. The forest, wild, sacred, untamed, opened its arms. She didn't stop until the moon was high above her and the leaves whispered her name in hushed tones. There, in a clearing surrounded by thick trunks and tangled roots, she fell to her knees. The earth was soft, welcoming, like a long-lost mother's lap. Ira pressed her palms into the dirt and whispered thanks to no one and to everything. The trees, the shadows, the sky, they had taken her in without question. And then she smiled. It wasn't forced or fearful, nor carved by anyone else's will. It was her smile, born from breath and freedom. The kind of smile that had once stirred the heart of a prince and haunted the dreams of a kingdom. The kind they had tried to burn, erase, and banish. But here in the forest, it returned to her, whole. That night, Ira sat beneath a great fig tree and sang softly. Not songs of sorrow but of wonder, little melodies her mother once hummed while cooking, lullabies that rose from the bones like memory. Her voice was soft, yet it traveled far, curling through branches and weaving into the wind. And slowly the forest responded. A rustle in the bushes revealed a doe, stepping lightly into the clearing. She stood still, blinking at Ira, then bent her head, unafraid. Moments later, birds descended from the canopy, their feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. A fox appeared, then a hare, and then a procession of creatures, drawn not by hunger or curiosity but something else. They sat around her like students before a quiet teacher. Ira stopped singing. She looked around, uncertain. "Why are you here?" she asked. The animals said nothing. But in their silence was understanding. And so she smiled again. The air shifted. Somewhere deep in the forest, a tree creaked as if awakening from a dream. Leaves above shimmered with silver, though no light touched them. The roots below pulsed faintly. A hush fell over the land, not of fear but reverence, like the moment before a sacred drumbeat. Ira stood and began to walk. Wherever her feet touched, grass brightened. Not with color but with feeling. The earth remembered her. Not just the girl who had escaped the palace but something older, a presence born of softness and strength, a spirit that could not be burned. She came upon a dying tree, its bark gray, its branches stripped. She laid her hand against its trunk and closed her eyes. For a moment nothing happened. Then the bark shifted. It didn't grow leaves or blossoms. Instead, a face appeared, not carved but grown, subtle and serene. A smile not unlike her own. The tree shuddered. A leaf sprouted. Then another. Across the forest, more trees began to murmur. They did not speak in words but in wind and warmth. Vines twisted upward in spirals. Moss spread like soft laughter. Flowers bloomed where none had grown for years. And on many trunks faces emerged, not copies of Ira but echoes. Smiles unique yet familiar, gentle yet powerful. The forest was becoming alive in a new way. Word spread though none knew how. A hunter passed the edge of the forest and saw a light glowing where no torch had been lit. A child, wandering after a dream, claimed to hear laughter carried on the river breeze. A shepherd found his goats gathered before a tree, staring upward at a bark-etched smile. Back in the kingdom, people began to whisper. They said the forest was no longer silent at night. That it hummed. That birds now sang unfamiliar tunes at dawn. Some swore they saw deer watching them from the trees, their eyes too knowing to be wild. But what chilled the queen most was what the children said. She's still smiling, Mama. She's smiling from the woods. The queen sent scouts. None returned. And yet, the forest never swallowed them. It simply let them forget. One by one, those who entered returned days later, unsure why they had gone, with peace softening their faces. Meanwhile, Ira stayed hidden beneath the trees. She built no shelter, needing none. The forest bent to shade her when rain fell. Fruit dropped gently into her hands. She was not worshipped nor feared. She simply was. One evening, as the sky turned copper and the forest glowed with the last golden breath of the sun, Ira stood in her clearing once more. The animals gathered again. The trees listened. The smiles carved by time and wind turned toward her. She sang and the forest responded, not in echo but in harmony. Ira closed her eyes, her voice rising with the wind. Her smile, the one they tried to bury, burned silence, had not only returned. It had rooted. And now it bloomed.